we just passed, that was a memorial that was set up when they dedicated this section of the highway to Trooper Lamonaco. We'll be coming up on the spot where I believe Trooper Lamonaco would have been waiting, sort of as, I guess you call it, a speed trap. Because at least it'll be claimed by Mr. Manning that it was and I suspect that would be it on the left we just passed, or up here would have been one of the two places where it's possible for the official vehicles to cross the highway. Yeah, probably in there. Manning is behind the wheel and apparently speeding, and Trooper Lamonaco will have pulled out and will continue down the road. The process in those days was not necessarily to call into headquarters when making a traffic stop. It would be after dark, but at the time where this we're trying to emulate now is roughly in the 4:30 time frame now. Now he would not have pulled him over. So it's been quite a distance where it would either take for the trooper to decide whether he was going to pull over the car, the 77 Chevy Nova that Manning is driving, and presumably has Mr. Williams in the passenger seat. He will pull, Trooper Lamonaco will pull the car over, and they will stop at milepost 3.8. Right now we're at milepost 4.6. Okay, 4.4 is here. The Truck Stops of America is to the right. We'll talk a little bit about more about that in a little bit. Milepost 4.2. So this is quite a long stretch that Trooper Lamonaco is following, or is trying to catch up and then pull over Manning. Okay, milepost 4. So they will pull over right in this area. You can see 3.8 over here. This is roughly where this Manning will be pulled over. Imagine now that there were two cars here off on the right-hand shoulder. The first car is the Blue Nova, driven by Thomas Manning. The second car is the State Trooper Cruiser, driven by Trooper Lamonaco. The trooper exits his car and walks up to the driver's side of the Blue Nova. Presumably he asks for driver's license, registration, and insurance. And before that happens, he spies the gun that is on the waist of Manning. He requests or orders Manning out of the car and begins to frisk him. He takes away his gun and puts it into his own belt. In the meantime, Williams, who's in the passenger side, bolts out of the car and starts firing at the trooper with his gun. In the meantime, Manning has pushed the trooper to the ground, and he exits or runs away in the opposite direction. This puts the trooper in a very bad position. Fortunately, so far, he hasn't taken any bullets that did not hit his bulletproof vest. He's wearing a bulletproof vest, both front and back. Trooper's able to get up, goes around the front of the car. Now Williams is in the rear of the car, and gunshots are exchanged through the windows, which shatters the rear window of the car and puts bullet holes in the front windshield. Unfortunately now, Williams, in firing away with his gun, is able to hit the trooper below his vest, just above the kneecap of his right leg, which causes the trooper to turn. This exposes the part of his body that is not covered by the body armor. And in shooting, Williams hits the trooper through his left armpit, which passes through his chest cavity and hits his heart, and it will be fatal. The trooper falls forward into the snow. Manning retrieves his gun and his license from the trooper and shoots him 3 times into the back of his body armor. He gets back in the car, as does Williams, and the two of them drive away. Here's a map which we're going to use to display the path which the fugitives will follow. And now we pick up the route as we continue on. And we're also passing the Trooper Lamonaco Memorial here. They're different cars or trucks see what has happened. The shooting site at milepost 3.8. Manning gets off the road. He's actually almost literally pushed off the road, apparently, and gets on to Haynesburg River Road, where we are right now. And I'm not going to try to emulate what they were doing, but apparently they sped off. As we go up Haynesburg River Road, we will get to the end and make a left onto north or eastbound Route 94 going towards Blairstown. When Manning made that turn, he goes over to the general store. They make the call to their comrades and then come out like a bat out of hell out of the side street there and cut off a woman by the name of Joan Gouger. Gouger will later testify that Manning ran the stop sign and that there were 2 men that were in that car. The car will continue at an excessive speed in front of her and then will veer off, make a left-hand turn going into Station Road, the same road where that vehicle will be found later on that evening, abandoned. Now, as we go through this, and it's really unclear whether Manning, who is driving, and what's important about Joan Gouger's testimony is that she says that there are 2 people in the car, because Manning at his trial will maintain that there are 3 people in his car. Mr. Williams is not there, but 2 hitchhikers that he supposedly picked up somewhere on Route 80. And then when we get to the spot where they ditched the car, he told them go off and pointed them in the direction of the Truck Stops of America, which we passed at exit 4. That part of the story doesn't really seem to make a whole lot of sense, and the prosecution didn't buy it, to say the least. But getting back to Manning and Williams and the fact that Ms. Gouger testified that there were two people in the car in front of her whose rear window would have been blasted out by the gunshots and also had bullet holes in it. So essentially, if you're looking at it from Manning and Williams' perspective, they're thinking about getting rid of this car. You know, or they can't go very far. They certainly can't go anywhere near someplace that might have a roadblock. And where we were just a couple of minutes ago, that will become a beehive of activity following when the call is made into Blairstown, which I'll explain also how that worked. So Manning and Williams are, we should talk more about Manning. Manning is on the most wanted list by the FBI, and his face is plastered all over the place. The thing is, though, that he will maintain that Trooper Lamonaco recognized him, and then that's how the gun battle ensued, and that Manning was basically shot Trooper Lamonaco in self-defense. The thing is, though, that Manning on that day, December 21st, 1981, looked nothing like he would look in the wanted poster. In the wanted poster, he has a long beard, long hair, whereas he's been, he doesn't have any facial hair at the time he's pulled over, and his hair is short. So it's extremely unlikely that Trooper Lamonaco would have recognized him if the only thing he had to go by would have been a wanted poster, which showed a completely different person. Not to mention that the name on the license, the driver's license, was completely different. Manning was operating under an alias of Eastbury. Now I'm making a left here onto 94. We're following their footsteps, so to speak. Not literally their footsteps, although we will do that too, to the extent that we can. Manning, who was driving, must have known the area at least somewhat, because we're going to go up here to what was a general store. Manning is going to make a left here onto Mount Pleasant Road. We don't think he parks in front of the general store because he's going to come out of this road like as I said, a bat out of hell. It's the blue building. I'm going to turn around, but the general store was in operation in those days. It was called Fink's General Store. And they will make a phone call to their quote-unquote comrades from there. They had gas pumps out front, and there must have been a payphone. Don't forget, this is long before the advent of cell phones. So this is once they make the phone call, and we've not dwelled as much time maybe as we would to emulate how long they would have been here, because it would have been at least a couple minutes, you would have to think. But they make a call. They must be setting up, when they make the call, they must be setting up a meeting place. So I'll make the turn here, but we're very close to where they will ditch the car. Now, it has snowed recently when this takes place, and that's an important thing. This is Station Road here. Now, we will go up, not quite as far as the viaduct, the Paulinsko Viaduct. It's unclear whether there was snow on the road and they ditched the car somewhere in this area. Don't know if there was there probably was a guardrail at that point. If there wasn't, they couldn't ditch the car over there any further anyway. Possibly underneath here. Don't know exactly, but we just passed a driveway of Elizabeth Lefsick, who would testify at the subsequent criminal trial of Manning and Williams. And here you see a comparison between present day and from approximately 1920, why this is called Station Road. This is the driveway of Elizabeth Lefsick. It's the only property, the only house on the lower part of Station Road. When Manning and Williams come here, they never make it to the upper part where there are more houses, and they want to steal a car. So Manning comes back to this driveway, goes up and looks for a car, doesn't find a car, and then comes back down. What's strange is, though, that the driveway is snow covered, but there are two sets of tracks, two sets of footprints here, two going up, two going down. One of presumably Manning, but also one of a child who must have, either before or after Manning was there, gone up and down the driveway. When Manning doesn't find a car here, he'll walk back to the car, which at this point probably is stuck underneath the viaduct, and that's when they will have to decide how they're going to go from there. This road, as we go up the hill here, I know when I moved into the area 30 years ago, they had warning signs that they would not plow above a certain point on this road. Okay, here we are underneath the Polandskill Viaduct. A lot more graffiti than there would have been in 1981. In fact, I was here in the late 80s and I don't think there was much of any graffiti. So, if you look up the side of this hill, imagine this is now during a time when there's no snow. If there's 6 inches of snow, it would be virtually impossible to get up the side of this. As far as we know, they did not attempt to get up onto the cutoff here, onto the viaduct. So we don't know to what degree they knew railroad geography in this area. So they choose to go on what is the Polandskill Valley Trail. It's the old New York Susquehanna Western Railway through here. The station was right underneath. The Polandskill, the river, it's not the Polandskill River, but the Polandskill is under the next arch from here. Actually, 2 arches. So the Polandskill Valley Trail is the way they go. It wasn't a designated trail in those days, but it was just an empty right-of-way. I'm not going to go the whole way here. It's 3 miles. And actually what will happen is that the right-of-way will branch off to the right and head towards the Truck Stops of America. Now the question is, did they find this route because of some knowledge on their part, or is it just basically dumb luck? I suspect that it's dumb luck. it just so happens that they ditched the car underneath the viaduct or near the viaduct, had a sense of dead reckoning as to which way to go. They probably see this pathway, and I suspect that they just don't want to be walking along a roadway. So this is perfect for them in a sense that they can basically stay away from any kind of contact with the public if they can avoid it. Now, it's somewhere in this area. I don't know if you can see any houses from here, but one of the neighbors, according to Renee Mate, hears two men arguing in this area right here. Renee's property is on the opposite side of the river, but it was somebody on this side of the river that hears the two men. So that confirms that this right of way was where they chose to go, at least initially. Now, later on, when I say later on, farther down the trail, they would cross Route 94 and then end up at the truck stop. But in between Route 94, and I'm guessing maybe even beyond Stark Road, where it crosses, where this pathway, this right-of-way passes over Stark Road, there's a report from Larissa, who had talked to someone who was involved, I'll put it that way, with the state police, that they heard dogs, the type that you would use for following a scent, that later that night over in the area between Stark Road and the truck stop. So that confirms that they were following that scent. Here's the Paulin's kill. They followed that scent, and that would indicate that that was the actual road that was being taken, the route that was being taken. Now, in those days, there might have been a lot less scrub through here, but given the time of year, it would have been a similar type of thing where there isn't a lot of cover. But still, once again, these two fugitives now, who the clock is ticking on their car, they've abandoned it in a place that isn't a real, I'll say, busy place. There's not a lot of traffic through there, particularly if the upper part of Station Road is not plowed. That they were pretty lucky in the sense that that car is not discovered until 7:30ish that night. And because of that, it'll give them a chance to get away before it's discovered who they are. And it'll actually take some time. We're talking in 1981, there's the sophistication of record keeping when it comes to licenses and so forth. It'll take time for them to actually be discovered as to who they are and where they were living. Now, I'm making pretty good time here. You have to realize, though, in the snow, you're not going to make as good a time. You're also leaving footprints behind yourself. So
these two guys now, whereas if it had been like under these conditions, sure, the dogs could still follow them, but footprints are so much easier to follow. And what they're doing is, and they know this, of course, is that for them, wherever they go, they're leaving a very visible tracing of their route. Now, if they'd gone off on the cutoff, they could have ended up at the truck stops of America. But I'm not sure that they knew that. We don't know what they knew. It was kind of a moot point given the difficulty of actually getting up onto the viaduct. Since this tragedy occurred, there's been that rumor that the two used the cutoff to actually get to wherever they were going. Ultimately, the truck stop. Now here we branched off. To the left is where the Susquehanna went. This is the Lehigh, New England, or what was. And I'm not going to go too much farther. I see no trespassing signs, but I just want to point out, as you go through here, it's actually quite a distance from here, so I'm not going to go any further, but there's a bridge that goes over the Paulinskill. The Paulinskill is still to our right here, and the bridge crosses over and is actually quite crossable. It might have been a little bit slippery with snow on it, but there are ties, and it's actually, I've done it in the past to cross over, but it certainly was doable. So from their perspective, they've picked the correct route, and it actually brings them almost literally to the truck stop. So once again, I tend to believe it was dumb luck. I doubt that they knew exactly where they're going. They're just going not only dead reckoning, but also, well, here's this trail, let's see where it brings us and go from there. And they end up where they needed to be, at least that night. So this was at one time known as Haynesburg Junction. Haynesburg being the area, but the junction between the Lehigh New England Railway, which went all the way into Pennsylvania. Actually, the Susquehanna did too, but by a much more circuitous route through the town of Columbia. But the rights of way here are still extant for the most part. And at least between here and the truck stop. And the scent from the dogs will end at the truck stop. There are different accounts that it ends at Route 94, but also another account says that it ended at the truck stop. And the truck stop would be the most likely place that they would have been picked up. If you're giving someone who doesn't know the area very well, and presumably the comrades didn't know it well enough to be directed to some obscure location in this area, that the truck stop would have made the most sense. Granted, they're going into where there's going to be a tremendous amount of activity, and they had to know that that would be the case, that it was counterintuitive that they would have chosen to do it that way, but for them it worked. It's kind of a, once again, lucky in a what else can you say? From their perspective, it was lucky. That the car doesn't get discovered, and at least until they're well on their way back home, and they choose the route that would have gotten them to where they needed to be. As we return back, you have to remember that at the time that Manning and Williams are walking in the direction towards where I'm going right now, in other words, towards me, I'm going in the opposite direction in which they were coming, that it was getting dark. At this point, between, I'm going to guess, 4:30 and 4:45. So it's not quite dark yet when they're coming through here, but it's getting to that point. Now, the other bit of luck they have is that snow does provide a certain degree of reflective light, in which case, even when it became pitch black, let's say, if it did, that they'd still have some degree, they'd be able to see. And the trail is pretty well, even, well, back in those days, the railroad had been gone 20 years, but it was still fairly well demarcated, as it is still to this day, that they would have been able to follow it. Whether they knew that it was going to bring them to the truck stop, I have no idea. If they had a sense of direction, in other words, sort of, yeah, we know we have to go roughly in this direction to get there, then they would have basically lucked out. Exactly how they would have figured, if they didn't know the right of way, the question I have, how did they know that if they kept going, that if it didn't end up exactly where they needed to be, how are they going to get to the truck stop? Now, they must have figured they crossed Route 94 because they came in that way. And the fact that the right-of-way on the opposite side, that's at Brugler Road, I'll show you that at Brugler Road, they would have had another opportunity to make a decision, but they would have not wanted to be walking along Route 94. Route 94 would have been busy to begin with, but that's where state police and any kind of police would have been coming through there. Any two guys walking along, and they may not, the police may or may not know at this point, when I say this point, let's say 5:30, by the time they get to Route 94, may not know exactly who they're looking for, but two guys walking in the snow, one of whom is bleeding, would have been highly suspicious, to say the least. So they knew that they had to stay undercover. They had to get the 3 miles from the Paulinsville Viaduct to the Truck Stops of America in Columbia, but they had to do so in a way that didn't reveal their presence, other than the fact that they're leaving footsteps or footprints in the snow as they went. That's something there's nothing they could do about that. But they had to be sure to keep themselves incognito to the extent that they possibly could. And they're successful. Obviously, they do manage to evade the police, evade scrutiny, even when they appear in the... They would have been looking for the motel. I'm guessing that's where they would have met, because there would have been activity there already. You can see the viaduct. We're coming close now, back. As they got close to the truck stop, they would have known that they were probably getting close. They might have heard activity, Maybe would have seen lights through the trees. So as it got closer, it would have gotten easier. In addition to the fact that this pathway I just showed you would lead them almost to the, not quite, but almost to the doorstep of where they're going to be picked up. Let me talk about luck. I once again, I don't think these guys are geniuses. I mean, they're smart at getting away and figuring out how to jump from place to place. Although they run out of luck, but under these circumstances, luck had to have played a huge role in them getting away. There's just no way they were that smart. It was just a combination, a little bit of cunning, but a lot of luck. No doubt. Absolutely no doubt. I don't see any houses. It might have been a house well up the side of the hill going up Station Road. If these guys were loud enough, their voices might have traveled quite a distance, especially in the snow. Snow seems to allow sounds to bounce off the ground and be heard. But if they're yelling at each other, presumably because they're pissed at each other that they just killed a state trooper, and they know that they're going to be on every wanted poster you can think of, and they're going to be spending the rest of their lives either running from the police or in jail. As it'll turn out, it'll be most of their time, in their remaining lifetime, they'll be in jail. I mean, back in the day, when I was a little bit younger, in my late 20s, when I first started coming here, this is a tough climb. I wouldn't normally go this way, but there's a pathway on the other side here, and but in snow, I would say forget it. Even underneath the viaduct, if they've been clear, it would have been very difficult.
The problem that they have is there are two rivers that they have to cross. They are headed for their, we'll call a hideout in Marshall's Creek, Pennsylvania, which, if we were back at milepost 3.8 where the shooting took place, that would be about 8 miles from there via Route 80, give or take. The thing is, in order to get from here, where they are, to home, they have to cross the first river is the Paulinskill. This second river is even more problematic, and that's the Delaware. It's in the upper 20s. It's a gloomy day. Now, today is not as gloomy. It's hardly as gloomy as it would have been that particular day. Much darker than it is right now, what we're seeing here in this video, which I'll tell you that was not recorded on December 21st. But we've tried to emulate from the perspective of sunset. But sunset probably on December 21st will, and darkness will fall a lot faster. So they're up against that as well, not to mention the cold. The clock is ticking on the car that's sitting over on Station Road. Now we know it based on the time of the shooting, which is somewhere after 4:15, there was a call made by Charles Hamilton, who was with the ambulance corps in Blairstown at that point, and he pulls over. He sees that the trooper's been shot. He checks for a pulse. He doesn't find a pulse, and he jumps into the cruiser and tries to figure out how to operate the radio so he can call into Blairstown. Now, in those days, this is a state trooper car, a cruiser. The headquarters, or the head where the particular troop is located, is not where it is today. Today, the local troop is headed or is located off of exit 12 in Hope. In those days, it was located above what is now the Blairstown Inn in the center of Blairstown. So anyway, Mr. Hamilton makes this call, and he finally was able to get through, not a call, but a radio, and he explains what has happened, and of course they will send all, troopers will be coming from every direction you can imagine to this one particular spot. But in the meantime, the Manning and Williams have gotten away. No, in the days before cell phones, there is citizens band radio, and the reason why they probably get right off onto Haynesburg River Road is that they imagine themselves probably being pushed into a wall somewhere in the water gap, or basically being crushed or stopped, even because it's possible that the trucks could have basically blockaded them, and they would have been basically sitting ducks in terms of they would have gotten caught. So they decide to come up this way, and thinking on the fly, well, what are we going to do next, type of thing. I'm trying to put myself in a sense in their place. What they would do, they will probably go by back roads from when their comrades pick them up. What happens next is that, in talking about the Delaware River, in order to get back home, they must realize that they can't go, obviously they can't go back via Route 80. That's out of the question. That'll be closed off. There's the bridge at Portland, at Columbia, that has to be closed off. We know it was closed off, but they have to rationalize also that's the case. They're not going to go north. Dingman's Ferry is, I would think, probably they wouldn't think about that, and not to mention they have to go up quite a ways. It's probably not what they want to do. So the only alternative that they're left with is to go south. Now, the next bridge that crosses over, excluding the footbridge in Columbia, which they wouldn't do that either. The next bridge down further would be the free bridge at Belvedere. They must figure that's probably not a good option either. So then they decide, well, thinking even further south would be to go to Phillipsburg. Now, the problem they have is that they have a car that's registered in Pennsylvania, and the risk that they have is that they must suspect that they somehow, to cover their tracks, so to speak, that they need to steal a car. And in fact, this is something that they mention, or Manning mentions during his testimony, that was part of their goal, to try to steal a car. And what they do is they start going south, probably on Route 519, and they get to Harmony Township, and they do find a car there. They steal it. Not sure what time this would have actually taken place, but what does happen is that the car will be found at 7:15 to have been stolen. But there must be long gone by the time that takes place. They now go in two cars, and I'm guessing that Manning and Williams are in the stolen car, and whoever the quote-unquote comrade is who's picked them up from here is in the other car. They probably go down. In those days, there was like an overlook at there are two bridges in Phillipsburg, one free, one at least now is a toll bridge. They probably were looking for police activity. They probably didn't see any, and as a result, the two cars went across into eastern Pennsylvania. They ditched the car that they stole. That will be found at 1:15 or something the following morning, and then they go with the car that the comrades were driving, and that they go back to their home in Marshall's Creek, and they get ready to leave there because there will be a raid on that particular house 19 days later. Now, as to exactly when they would leave is not clear, but they will get out of there. They have a sinister ability to figure out when they are at risk of being discovered wherever they are. Subsequently, even as we go a couple years into the future, it will be several years before both of these guys are caught. Not they're caught separately, but Manning in particular will get away just before a group of them are caught in Ohio. So there's like a sixth sense of how they have this ability to know that when they're at risk of being caught, that they need to move to some other location. So they abandoned their house in Marshall's Creek. Now, while all of this is taking place, and they are off to, well, first Harmony, then Phillipsburg, and then to Marshall's Creek, Trooper Lamonaco is the ambulance corps and so forth has come in, and they've taken him to the hospital in East Stroudsburg. He's been mortally wounded. He will not survive. He will be buried on Christmas Eve. I mean, this occurs on the 21st. There will be a very, very large funeral that'll take place with somewhere in the neighborhood of about 1,000 troopers from all over the United States. And he will be buried on Christmas Eve of 1981. And that's kind of the full story in terms of at least the background of what has occurred. Now, the thing is that before Trooper Lamonaco is shot, about a month before, he was at a meeting of I guess you would call it the union, the fraternal order of the police, and where he complains that there needs to be more troopers on the road, I guess is what but he actually says that somebody's going to get killed because there's inadequate coverage. And in fact, if a few changes will be made, one of which I've already mentioned, and that is that troopers will be required to communicate back to their supervisor or to wherever they're stationed out of during the day for any type of road stop that they make. There were changes that took place as a result of the death of Trooper Lamonaco. There's no doubt about that. This is a wake-up call, very much so. But the thing is that before we get to where they actually catch Manning and Williams, they will initially assign 250 troopers to the manhunt. Now, they don't know where these people have gone, and it takes them a little bit of time to figure out by fingerprints that it was Manning. Williams is thought to be there in the car because there's a greeting card which is found in the back seat with his fingerprints on it. And Williams will, although he doesn't testify, Manning will maintain that Williams was not staying with him at the exact time that the shooting takes place, but that the day before the shooting took place, that he would actually drop Manning off, or drop Williams off rather, at a bar in Bud Lake, New Jersey, which is near Netcom, and that was the last that they saw of him. Now the prosecution didn't buy this story, but that's another thing entirely. So this is the Lehigh New England Railway right-of-way, right here where this stretch of road is. This is the Department of Public Works, DPW, in Knowlton. We're about between a quarter and a half a mile from where this right-of-way crossed over Stark Road. Manning and Williams would have been walking in this direction. They walk past the DPW building, which was there back in 1981, and they come up somehow from there, and they're going to go over to the municipal building. Now, it's not clear if the building was open or if they broke into it, but the scent from the dogs went from the DPW garage over to the building, which was a school at one time, but it was a municipal building at that time. They go in, there's a trail of blood leading to the men's room. We know that Williams was bleeding. He'd gotten hit by glass. He wasn't shot per se. And he must have gone into the men's room, and it makes a mess. There's blood, there's paper towels. It's just but he apparently cleans up, if you want to put it that way. They leave the building. Now this, once again, this is the dogs are following the scent. They retrace their steps back to the building. And then the scent disappears. Now this is obviously strange, because then it raises the question, well, where did they go? The way that the scent ended, the way the dogs reacted, would be consistent with somebody getting into a car. In other words, they get into the car and that's it. They're gone. The scent is, there's no trail anymore. The problem with that, it doesn't make any sense that they would be picked up here. That Manning and Williams would have told the comrades, might have been Carol Ann Manning for all we know, to pick them up here. This is an obscure place, and it's off the road, Simpson Road, which is behind us, or in front of me, in this direction. The truck stop, as the crow flies, is maybe a quarter mile in this direction. My theory is that they somehow either continue up this road, which could be cause the scent to be lost. That's quite possible. That's a possible explanation. Otherwise, had they gone into the woods, which would have been more direct in a sense, that trail might have still been where the dogs could have picked up the scent. Don't know. This is all pure speculation on my part. What tugs at me with all this is that if you think about this, Manning makes the call to Marshall's Creek and has to give a location for them to meet at. It can't be just I'll meet you on Route 80 or something like that. It has to be a specific place, and a place that Carol Ann would know. And the only place I can possibly think of back in those days would have been the truck stop, or specifically possibly the motel that was at the truck stop. And in order to get from here to there, they could have walked down this way, although that puts them onto Simpson Road, and just beyond Simpson Road is Route 80, and that's where the trooper has been shot. So there's a whole bunch of activity on Route 80 back there. Simpson Road might have been, well, probably still was busy because it's very nearby. But the question is, would they have risked that? Would they have gone through the woods? But going through the woods is a tricky proposition, and we don't have any indication they did that. I would think they would have seen footsteps in the snow. That's where the snow comes in. So, but possibly if they walked down this way along the macadam, that could have caused the scent to be lost. That's, once again, pure speculation on my part, but I'm just trying to make sense out of it, and they don't have any testimony, as far as I'm aware, that indicates where they would have gone beyond here, because actually, according to the testimony, they weren't even here. Manning claims that he left his two hitchhikers to walk in this direction, and that this was the two hitchhikers, not him, and that Williams wasn't even with him, and that Williams is back in Bud Lake or someplace out there, 20, 30 miles to the east of here. So it's really a conundrum in terms of trying to figure out, okay, who or where did they actually go from here? We know they got out of the area. That much we know. I'm going to still stick with it. They somehow walk down here and they somehow get to the truck stop. They may not have gone all the way to the Simpson Road when they saw where they were, because they know they're getting close when they're here, that they somehow would have then gone off into the woods close to Simpson Road and then made it to the truck stop. It's a guess. I can't give you anything definitive because we just don't have anything definitive. We're going to go over to the truck stops of America just to show you how close that is, and you can tell at this time it's still there's some light, and with snow on the ground you can still kind of see where you're going. By the time they're done, it's probably pretty close to being dark. The thing is, at this point, the police still don't know, the state troopers still don't know exactly who they're looking for. Although one of the men is bleeding. Now, we don't think that they were shot, because unlike in the Hollywood movies where you like a flesh wound, nobody's going to be able to walk any kind of distance with any kind of bullet wound. It's just not going to happen. Probably when the rear window was shot out, there was glass that flew, and as a result, there might have been shards of glass, and one or both of the men got cut, and that's where the blood in the car comes from. But that's probably the extent of it. It's probably a relatively minor wound, not something that was caused by the bullet directly. So here's the truck stops, and this is where, and the actual shooting scene is basically here, just off to our left. Now what we see here, and now we're starting to lose the light, so you can't really see much of anything, but what we see here did not exist. This is all very, very rural area at that point. There's the truck stop is like in the middle of basically nowhere for the most part. And we're coming right back to where the memorial would be just off to our left here. This is Simpson Road. We're now essentially parallel to where we went before. Route 80 is just to our left. And now we've done a full circle. So in regards to the aftermath to Lamonaco, the shooting of Trooper Lamonaco, what can you tell us about that time, within the day or so within, that when that took place, which took place, we know the one thing that ties it to this location, or actually the other side here onto Station Road, where the vehicle that was the getaway car, I guess you would call it, was abandoned on that side of the river from here. That triggers a manhunt, where the state police don't know where those two men are at that point. Have they left the town, or are they wandering basically the countryside? But you remember some of that where they actually were here.
Yes.
The police were around.
Yes, I do. That day sticks in my mind. It was a terrible day. It was a terrible event, and we were all upset about it. On the day after, I believe it was, the police came to our house, and they looked at our outbuildings. They searched them quite carefully. They were alert. They were very professional, and they were clearly concerned. And as you said, they didn't know if there was somebody maybe hiding in our barn that we didn't even know about. And it sticks in my head too, because the police came into our house, and they were talking to my mother. They were interviewing my mother and asking if everything was all right. And behind her was my brother. Now, my brother was a big guy. He had a big black beard, and he was a little ominous looking, frankly. And I saw the police, and as soon as they saw him, they really stood at attention, because they're thinking, wow, this doesn't look so good. So they asked my mother, who is this guy? And she said, oh, that's my son, he's okay. And of course, then it was all right. But that episode sticks in my mind. And also, they're going into the barns and looking carefully at the barns to see if there's anybody hiding there. Of course, it could have happened, and we wouldn't even known about it. So that day was quite an eventful day, and certainly a sad chapter in Knowlton's history, the murder of Trooper Lamonaco.
This is because this whole search will continue on for several years. They don't catch. I don't think they catch. Williams, I think, is the first one, is caught in Ohio in '84, so that's almost 3 years later. And then Manning is caught in Virginia in '85. So it's quite a long time that this whole thing takes place. So in a sense, Knowlton is still part of that during that whole, terrible time where they're looking for these guys. And finally, of course, they're finally caught. Here we are at the Trooper Philip Lamonaco Memorial on Route 80 in Knowlton Township. When Larissa and I started putting together the background for doing this video, it was the intent that there would be part of the story which was be devoted to telling the terrible events of December 21st, 1981, but that we'd also devote a significant amount of video time to talk about Philip Lamonaco himself, and, well, if we were so fortunate, be able to talk to Donna Lamonaco, his widow. We started preparing for this back in 2019 or 2020, so this has been going on for quite some time. The first video we did was in February of 2021. I was able to talk to Donna Lamonaco in 2022. I wouldn't call it an interview, it was over the phone, but we spoke for over an hour, and she related a number of different things about not just herself, but of course Phil, as she referred to him as, and I'm going to refer to the trooper as Phil from here on in, because that's what she called him, and that's what his colleagues at the state police called him, Phil. Now, what do we know about Phil? What do we know about Donna Lamonaco? When I talked to her, the interview didn't, and I'll call it an interview, but it really wasn't, but it wasn't intended as such. I was actually almost intending it as a lead up to an interview, which has not yet occurred. I'm gonna kind of leave it to her. I don't know if she'll ever get to see this video, and I'm still very open to doing that, but I'm not going to actively pursue her in terms of doing the interview. At that time, I'd mentioned that, and she seemed to be open to it, and then I think I just wasn't psychologically prepared to do that video, and that's 4 years ago now. I'm not sure I'm ready to do it now, but I think now that I know so much more about the background, and of course having talked to her, well, maybe there's never a time when you're fully prepared to talk to Donna Lamonaco. And she's very easy to talk to. It isn't that. It's what, in a sense, she represents. So when I spoke to her, we did talk about December 21st. That inevitably came up. That wasn't the first thing we talked about, but we did talk about it. And I think she was the one who brought it up. She said there was either a knock on the door or the doorbell rang, and there were two state troopers standing at the front door. And they said something to the effect that her husband, Phil, was down or something like that. I don't remember the exact wording that she said that they used, but they didn't say that he had been killed. They don't mention any of that. They just said you have to come with us. We'll take you to see him, I guess is the way they put it. So they get into the car. I don't know what happens. She has 3 kids, so I'm not really clear on what happens, whether there's somebody there to mind the kids, because she had 3 young kids at this point. That's a detail I didn't get into with her. So they get into the car, the trooper car, and the 3 of them drive from her house their house in White Township. They would have come this way to get to East Stroudsburg. The trooper, after he was shot, and the call was made, they come and they take him to the hospital in East Stroudsburg. They take her into the room, and she said that Phil was there, laid out, very peaceful, and it was, I don't know if that's at the point where it actually struck her that it really happened. She said obviously she was in a state of shock throughout this whole ordeal. And I guess then they come home. And then we didn't get into the preparation for what happens next. Obviously there's a funeral which takes place on Christmas Eve, the 24th of December, 2 days later, basically, at that point, where 1,000 state troopers from all over the U.S. will attend, as well as a total of 5,000 people who will be there. A small church, so the vast majority of people are outside the church. She said those 2 troopers who came to her front door now become her, I'll say, closest friends during this time. She said about the next year almost. The two troopers plus, I guess, their wives. I don't know if they had kids, but she said this now becomes like a little inner circle. And then there's a period where she, I think, becomes much more involved with the state police. Now, this is the point, I think, where we segue into talking about Phil, and I was interested in knowing more about him. What was he like at home, and what did he do in his spare time, that kind of thing. And she said he'd like to play with the kids. He liked to work around the yard. He'd cut the lawn. He liked to cut down trees. I'm not exactly sure how he did that, like with a chainsaw, but Phil would have Donna mark the trees, like with an X or something, and then he would take them down. They also had a dog, whose name I believe was Snooky. Snooky was a mix of Golden Retriever, Doberman, and German Shepherd. Sometime after Trooper Lamonaco dies, the dog, which was his dog, was really his dog, on a Sunday goes missing. And Donna called for the dog, and it wouldn't come back. And so she ended up calling the local radio station, the AM station, WRNJ, in Hackettstown, and said, she described the dog. If anyone sees it, she left her phone number, give me a call. About an hour or two later, she gets a call from a man who says, there's a dog meeting that description and mentioned a cemetery in Great Meadows. The cemetery in which Phil is buried. So she gets into the car, drives to the cemetery, and the dog is laying on Trooper Lamonaco's grave. And I asked Donna, had the dog ever been to the cemetery? And she said yes, but the dog was never to the grave. The dog always stayed in the car. So I'm guessing that the dog, by scent, now how the dog knew to get from the house to the cemetery, I said, now how far of a distance is that? She said 12 miles. So the dog somehow left their house, went 12 miles to the cemetery, and somehow, maybe by scent, because she would have been to the cemetery before, I don't know. Obviously she would have been there, but the dog would, I don't know how close to the grave was to where the dog could have seen. Somehow the dog figured out exactly where Phil was buried. Quite an amazing story. Other things we talked about? Well, I said, did you guys ever talk about what you would do when you were in retirement? And she said, yeah, we did, as a matter of fact. We talked about possibly retiring in Vermont. In fact, there's a photo of the two of them in Vermont, which I'll show at the very end of the video, of them at a gift shop in Vermont, I guess that would be the Green Mountains in Vermont. But she said, I don't know. I mean, maybe difficult to say what we would have done. Now, she also talked about, and of course this would have been before he died, that they'd sometimes have state troopers over their house with their wives. And she said what would happen is that the boys would end up like in the living room talking about trooper stuff, I'll call it, and the girls would end up in the kitchen. And she said it was kind of a little bit, a little bit amusing because the girls would be eavesdropping on, trying to hear some of the stuff that the guys were talking about out in the living room. The troop that Phil was part of was located in Blairstown. Later, it was moved to Hope near exit 12 on Route 80, but in those days it was in Blairstown. Phil worked a 3 to 11 shift, 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. And I think she said 3 days on, 2 days off. But every fifth Thursday, they would get paid. And a group of the troopers, after they got off work at 11 o'clock, they would go to the Red Barn to have, I guess, to have drinks, or they eat a late dinner or whatever, but they socialize. Now, originally, the plan was that the guys would do it alone, but Phil suggested that, well, why don't we bring our wives along? And the guys, I would say the guys, but his colleagues, they were sort of like, they were kind of, I'd say, a little puzzled by that, but they went along, and well, this became a social thing. Every 5 weeks, it would be the husband and wives would meet at the Red Barn. Now, the Red Barn would later become known, at least I remember it as the Forge. It was at the corner of Route 521 and Route 94. Today, it's Buck Hill Brewery, but in those days it was known as the Red Barn. We didn't actually discuss this part, but I think in knowing what Donna Lamonaco would later become involved with, and personalities of people who marry each other, there's usually one person is the extrovert and one person is the introvert. I suspect that Phil was the introvert and Donna was the extrovert, and they somehow get together. And the whole thing at the Red Barn, I'm suspecting also, as an introvert myself, maybe Phil was uneasy about being in that kind of a social situation alone, but bringing his wife along, the extrovert would kind of help him along, where he didn't have to be put under the pressure of chit chat, which, for introverts can be a little bit unnerving almost in some ways. Now, I asked her, how did you two meet? And she said, well, Donna said that the two of them played softball in Princeton. And so that's how they linked up, and they got married and had 3 kids, and then December 21st, 1981 happens, which throws everything. Just can't imagine what that does to a family. It would have been bad enough if this had occurred at any time during the year, but it happens right before Christmas. One of the questions I would have asked was, had you already picked out Phil's Christmas presents? I'm thinking, because the story, and this is not something that, this part of the story isn't, it's been out in the press for a while, ever since probably the first time she was ever asked the question, that she was baking cookies, Christmas cookies, at the time that the 2 state troopers showed up at her front door. After December 21st, she now becomes the sole provider. There is, fortunately, she is compensated through the state police, and there's also a fund that's set up which collects a significant amount of money. This is before GoFundMe exists, long before any of that exists. But so financially, I don't know. No matter how much money that could have possibly been given to her as of her husband, there's no way any of it is ever going to compensate for the loss of him. Now, one thing she did talk about, and she seemed to be particularly I would say proud of this, and this is when she becomes more actively involved with the state troopers and an advocate for not only the state troopers in general, but particularly those who have fallen, fallen heroes throughout the U.S. There was a state trooper, and I don't remember exactly when this took place, but I want to say it was at least a couple of years after 1981. A state trooper is killed in the line of duty on the New Jersey Turnpike, but as a result of being hit by a vehicle during a traffic stop. Now, I'm trying to remember, I don't know the exact details, but apparently there would be compensation had, at least under the existing rules, I guess I'll call it, there would have been compensation to the widow if he had been shot or killed as a result of some sort of if there was weapons involved, I guess you would say, but not because he was hit by a car or a truck. And Donna went to a meeting and said, this is unfair. There's really no difference between, I'll say, Mrs. Jones and myself. I'm speaking as if I were Donna Lamonaco now. There's no difference between Mrs. Jones and myself. Yes, I mean, my husband was shot to death, but I'm a widow, she's a widow. And of course, she's without a husband. So there's no difference. And that they actually changed the rules, and Mrs. Jones was I guess you could say, compensated, that she was able to obtain the whatever payment, I'll call that would have been given to a trooper who died in the line of duty. And she seemed to be proud. I got the sense that she was really, really proud of that. And she said, I know that I'm kind of, and I think she actually used the term royalty, but I got the sense that she meant it in almost like an ironic sense, that she, because of her situation, has become, and she didn't say this, but I'll say this myself because I think it's probably a true statement. She, to this day, really remains the face of the New Jersey State Police. Every December 21st, they come here, and I'm not going to stand in front of the memorial. I feel that I want to keep that distance, but they'll line up here. We've already shown in the video all the troopers, and there would be members of the family, and they come here, and they remember what had happened not too far from here. And I would think this would have to be something that, in a sense, is supportive, but it also it brings back memories that, well, the family somehow has to deal with. I'm not sure how they do that, but we didn't really get into that aspect of it when I spoke to Donna, but I mean, clearly in all I've read, and there have been no interviews, and I think this is part of one of the things that really made me very apprehensive, is that Donna Lamonaco, as far as I'm aware, has never sat down with anyone and actually done a full interview and on camera, and that's what I really wanted to do. But in doing this video, it's, as you can tell, it was, in a sense, front-loaded with a lot of information about December 21st, 1981, which it had to. It's well, not only part of history, but it's part of the story. If you understand it, we're now 45 years now from when that occurred, almost 45 years. And there are already more than 2 generations that have been born. So we don't want to forget what happened on that day, but the video, what I wanted to do was really to bring out the other aspects of Philip Lamonaco, who we see that photo of him. There are a couple of photos that are out there, but he's typically in his uniform, and there's more to him, obviously, or was more to him, obviously, than just his life as a state trooper. Although he was revered as a state trooper, his colleagues referred to him as a good guy, a good trooper, a good father. You know, those things that you kind of that describe him. But the thing is that my fear is that really Donald Lamonaco is probably the last close link to him, and to find out what he was like. And I was able to get a little bit of that. I mean, clearly what I've told you here gives you some background in terms of him, but I still feel that there's missing stuff that we just don't know about, and it would fill in what maybe we'd like to know about him, in addition to why there's a memorial here, and because he's remembered because of the person that he was. I think that's, you know, we know that he was a Trooper of the Year back in 1979. He was lauded by an article in the Star-Ledger only a couple of months before December 21st, 1981. So he was kind of, they even referred to him as a super trooper, which is maybe a little bit over the top in terms of, you know, how you would describe him. But he's someone who really, and the way I've heard it described, he was the type of person, if something was worth doing, it was worth doing well. And that was kind of his mantra in terms of how he was as a state trooper, and I guess that certainly as a person as well. So we have one more stop to make, where I want to tell a story that was related to me about a year or so ago, and I don't think the story's ever been told publicly, so it's something, I'll say something new, but I think that's where I want to end the video, and that will give us one more, I think, insight to the man, Trooper Philip Lamonaco. We're at what is now a rest stop off of Interstate 80 in Columbia at exit 4. None of this was here back in 1981. The story I'm going to tell was related to me by a friend on Facebook, Richard Onoravali. I hope I have his name pronounced correctly. He related this story a couple of years ago. It occurs somewhere in this area. I don't know exactly where. A friend of his, who at the time, I'll say from the description, was kind of a hippie, long hair person with a backpack. He's trying to hitch a ride on Route 80. And while he's standing by the side of the road somewhere in this area, the state trooper pulls up beside him. The trooper exits his vehicle and he walks up to Richard's friend and he says, and he admonishes him, he said, you know, you're not supposed to hitchhike on this road. And his friend, I guess, didn't know exactly what to say. And the trooper asked him, well, where are you headed? Where are you going? And Rich's friend says, well, I'm going to Mount Arlington, which would be exit 30. So that's about 25 miles from here. So the trooper says, I'll tell you what, if you consent to a search and you're clean, I'll take you to Mount Arlington. So even though he didn't have anything he thought that was objectionable, he was a little apprehensive. He said, okay, I'll consent. So the trooper searches him and searches his backpack, doesn't find anything objectionable. He said, so he hops in the car, and sure enough, the trooper takes him all the way to where he was going in Mount Arlington. And as he was exiting the vehicle, he realized he didn't know the trooper's name. He wanted to thank us over to shake the trooper's hand. And he notices the name tag on the lapel, Lamonaco. It was Trooper Philip Lamonaco. Now, the part of the story I omitted purposefully is that when this took place. This took place during the week of December 14th, 1981. And the following Monday, here, Trooper Lamonaco will be shot and killed. And so we end our story. If I get a chance to interview Donald Lamonaco, we'll pick this up and we'll tell more of the story. But even if we don't, I mean, I hope I've been able to convey, at least for those who may remember this, or those who never even heard of this whole story, that's really my intent here, to tell that story. And once again, if I get to continue to tell more, I'd be very happy to do so. But if it doesn't happen, I feel like at least now this much has been told to you, and with this final story, which I don't believe has ever been publicly told. There's so many stories about Philip Lamonaco, but actually there aren't that many, quite frankly. There's been a lot of newspapers, articles, but they seem to rehash a lot of the same stuff over and over again. And I'm really looking to delve into, or I've, at least in this video, I've tried to delve into background that really wasn't necessarily known. And I hope I've done that. I hope I've done at least an adequate job in that respect. So this is the end of part 45. Our next video will be part 46 on the Lackawanna cutoff.